Welcome back to Trinity Place. This is the 6th Sunday of Pentecost. Greetings. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is a sermon for the 6th Sunday of Pentecost. And we're going to weave between two readings a poem by Robert Bly called People Like Us, and the gospel text in the lectionary today, which is Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, verses 40 and 42. I'll start with an excerpt from People Like Us. There are more people like us all over the world. There are confused people who can't remember the name of their dog when they woke up, and people who love God but can't remember where he was when they went to sleep. Well, it hit me while I was praying recently that those ancients were 100% correct. We need help. We are a species insufficient to ourselves to live well. Now, at the time I was praying a prayer for peace, one that I have been making since Russia invaded Ukraine, and I realized in that moment what a stupid prayer it was. Because you see, at the beginning of the war, and again, and still, when the generals in Sudan, who are being paid by Russia and the United States, started killing for power, I began asking God to empower those who are waging peace in Russia and in Sudan. My prayers were for God to help those who were working toward stopping the violence. And then I looked out from where I was praying, and I saw the smoke from the Canadian wildfires. And the haze was so thick that I could barely see the other side of the lake. In fact, I couldn't see the other side of the lake, something that very rarely happens even in the soupiest morning fog. Everyone I spoke with during those smoke-filled days shared a sense of ominousity. Now, that's not a word, but it felt ominous to folks. It was like, this is going to start happening more and more now, isn't it? And sitting there, offering up my morning prayers, with the dog sitting next to me like she always does, as if it's all about her, it smacked me in the face that we don't have a prayer. I mean, it isn't about God helping us to help ourselves. We need God to make peace happen. We need God to kick our butts and force fit us into a more humanizing mold. And those ancients were totally right. We don't stand a chance of surviving ourselves without some direct intervention from the God of all that is. Now, Jesus described us well in that gospel reading today when he said so long ago, "To what will I compare this generation? It's like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn." And then he added a little personal testimony. "John came fasting, and they said he was possessed. I came sharing community around a table, and they said I was a glunt and a drunk." In other words, nothing is good enough for us. And anyone who tries to fix us is immediately discredited or discarded. Now, I realize that God's efforts to fix us haven't exactly gone well either. I mean, there's the Garden of Eden, Noah's zoological cruise, Moses in the Exodus, Solomon in the Civil War in Israel, even Jesus in the Kingdom of Heaven. None of those events fixed us, and even when it helped a little, it wasn't long enough, it wasn't very long before we were right back to our self-destructive ways. Now, for at least 300 years, God as a source of help has basically been poo-pooed. We could not, with cold reason and cool logic, prove God can intervene or have anything to do with the principalities and powers running things on this planet Earth. So we pretty much relegated God to warm thoughts and spectacular mysteries, things that do not truly intersect with our existence. Now, some of us have hoped against hope that God will hear our prayers. Prayers about people we love, who are ill, who are in danger, who do stupid things, who are flying to faraway places in airplanes. We don't know how prayers work, or even if they do work. But we try not to think about that too much. We just do it and cross our fingers. Really and truly, God has no place in a world that requires laboratory manufactured proof. Now, there are some brilliant mathematicians and physicists who posit God and see an opening for a mystery that we cannot measure or replicate, but they aren't leading the pack, and they play in a science that doesn't use a laboratory to verify hypotheses. Jesus' prayer of gratitude to God for hiding such things from the wise and the intelligent while being revealed to infants and goofballs is really kind of an interesting thought when you look at our world, or even the history of our world, not even the world of human beings. But all of this that I've been saying and talking about, the feelings especially, take me back to a very ancient people howling at the moon and dancing around the fire, recognizing that they do not have a chance in hell of surviving without help from God. Now, I don't know if they recognize their utter foolishness and self-destructive nature, the thing that I'm talking about, or if they simply understood the limits of their powers in the face of nature's magnificent majesty that could crush them like a bug, or drown them like a rat, or burn them up in a crisp. But while we have huge technological foot up on those ancient folks, we seem utterly incapable of recognizing that we are not self-sufficient, and that in fact, left to our own devices, we will kill ourselves. Surrounded by so much that is ominous, I want to tell you how it is that I still pray. And how it is, despite the secular consensus that God doesn't do anything, if even there is a God, how it is that I have reverted to an ancient understanding that the Creator of all that is will still do stuff to help us. Now, I don't know if I've told you this story before, but if I have, please indulge me like your old weird uncle who forgets the dog's name. I once spent 3 weeks in Guatemala trying to learn Spanish. I was a spectacular failure, just as I had been in sophomore high school Spanish class. But I tried harder in Guatemala with the same result. But that's not what this story is about. I was in this small city known for its historic beauty and language schools. And I lived with a family who would only speak Spanish with me and attended a school where only Spanish was spoken. So it was a difficult, uncomfortable time surrounded by vestiges of the past and bodies on the street. Literally, I passed bodies on the street that may have been dead and dying, I don't know, sort of like the priest in Jesus' Good Samaritan story. I was confronted with beggars and begging children, asking for money at every corner and in many of the cafes where I ate. I spent the first couple of days feeling guilty and ashamed. Gracias, no gracias, I repeated over and over again as children aggressively hawked bracelets on the street. No lo siento, I said to beggars, not making eye contact with them as I said, sorry, but I wouldn't give them any money. Long story short, it struck me how deeply flawed my reactionary self-preservation instinct was. While my resources were not unlimited, and I was going to be there for quite some time, I figured out how to say, sí, salud, instead of gracias, no gracias. The fact is, in that kind of an economy before smartphones and Apple Pay, and you're a tourist, you start collecting a lot of change. And so you start avoiding making change. When the exchange rate is wildly uneven, your pockets start to feel like sandbags. So you try to figure out how to limit taking on change. Coins, I mean. But I bought a change purse, and instead of avoiding change, I began to make sure that I had plenty of it all the time. I even went out of my way to get change. I made it my goal to never say gracias, no gracias. And always to have at least one coin that I could give if asked. The other thing I could do, I decided, was to always look directly in the eyes of those who were asking for something. I could stop where I was going, what I was doing. I could just stop and look him or her in the eyes and say, sí, salud. I'm sure I wasn't perfect at it, even after I decided to do that, but my strategy, by and large, worked. I went from a sense of scarcity to one of abundance. I no longer walked under a cloud of feeling like something ominous was going to happen, and instead, I greeted the streets as an opportunity to meet colleagues in need and be responsive to them. It changed everything. Well, didn't change how poorly I was doing in the school or communicating in my adopted home, but it caused me to feel empowered instead of powerless. Sí, salud, instead of gracias, no gracias. And then on my last day, I had an hour to kill before the cab or whoever was going to pick me up for the airport. And so I walked about a half mile down the street to La Merced, a 17th century monastery and a church that makes the sanctuary of 520 South Main Street here look like a storefront. There were baptisms going on, and so I sat toward the rear of what seemed like a 2-mile long nave. And I just sat there for a while in a kind of state somewhere between thought and prayer, drifting in and out of reflections about my time in Guatemala, and praying for those I had met and who had showed me such hospitality. As I stood to turn and leave, I could see a dark figure on the floor, huddled in the shadows just inside these massive wooden doors. I felt in my pocket for change, and there it was, my change purse, with quite a lot in it. I took out 4 coins for each of my children, and the rest was for whoever sat there in the shadows. As I approached the dark outline of a man, I began to see the contours of his body. Clearly, he was in his late 20s, early 30s, and he was missing both legs. And he was not huddled, as it turned out. Rather, his posture and his demeanor seemed relaxed and composed rather than despairing. His face was remarkably clear and clean, and the hair on his head and his beard were handsomely dark. His eyes, as I got up close, his eyes were far more noticeable than the absence of his legs. His eyes were brilliant. I placed the change purse in his cup or bowl, or maybe even his hand, I don't remember. But his eyes locked on to mine when he said, "Gracias, Dios te bendiga." Thank you, and God bless you, he said. In that man's eyes was the brilliance of a God, the spiritual strength of a Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha. Now, perhaps I only saw what I wanted to see, or was in some other way projecting my own stuff upon him in that situation, but I don't think so. Even now, with distance and time, I don't think so. The decision to give 1, 2, or 3 coins each time I was asked, and to say sí instead of no, it changed everything. Suddenly, I was no longer weary, and my burdens had become light. Truly, it was weird how fast the heaviness left, how suddenly what had just seemed ominous dissipated. And in that decision to say, sí, salud, literally, yes, bless, and to look those I encountered in the eyes, the impossible became possible. Even though I didn't know how it would turn out or if it would have any impact at all, one way or the other, it changed everything for me. I believe what those ancients believed, that we are incapable of living well if all we have is our own resources. I believe that, in fact, if God is not present or in part of this equation, that we will continue to do poorly. And it seems very clear to me, though I could not prove it in a laboratory or with a mathematical equation, it seems very clear to me that it requires very little from God for human beings to turn around and to thrive. It's almost miraculous how fast we go from no to yes when we're even just a little bit open to the presence of God in our midst. Thank you for being here. And gracias. Dios te bendiga. Bendiga, excuse me. See? Well, all right.